Well, thank you so much. Acting Dean Nichols, Dean Chamberlain, distinguished faculty, family and friends, and above all, graduates of Western Law, thank you for the kind invitation to address you on this special day. This is a very special day for me too. As a graduate of this school, I share a deep affinity with the class of 2023. I was in your place more years ago than I care to remember, but not so long ago that I've forgotten what today feels like for each of you. I know firsthand how hard you've worked to get here. And while it's normal to be thinking about the future and planning next steps, my hope is that you'll experience and remember today as a day when your professors, family, friends, and invited guests like me gathered around you to celebrate your singular achievement. And so, from the class of 2005 to the class of 2023, heartfelt congratulations. I do have a habit of clapping for myself, so it might happen again. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to also acknowledge family and friends who provided crucial support to the graduates at various stages of their personal and professional journeys. And I want to do something that was done at my convocation and ask the graduates to stand up and offer a round of applause to their family and friends who supported them in this journey. You won't be surprised to know that I thought very hard about the message I wanted to share with you. Some nugget of wisdom, some inspiring words that might stay with you as you join our noble and historic profession. Something that might speak to you about what this school meant to me and how it shaped the trajectory of my career and changed my life. And what I came back to time again was this: the best way to convey the most important things I want to share is to tell you a little bit about my own story. Mine is an unlikely story. My path to the role of managing partner at the age of 42, maybe even more so. I was born and raised here in London and have lived here almost my entire life, saving except a year I spent at the University of Toronto completing my LLM. My parents, like countless others, maybe some in this room, came to Canada in search of security and opportunity, and they found it. In her recent autobiography, Marie Hennen observed, quote, "We try to find ourselves in the history of others," end quote. For me, that history is rooted in the shifting and sometimes conflicting sense of place and identity, of belonging and of not belonging. My family arrived in Canada from Lebanon in the 1970s. Now, many of you know that at that time, Lebanon was rocked by waves of political, social, and economic crisis, eventually spilling over into outright civil war. The stories my parents and grandparents recounted are etched in my memory. Their sense of longing for a time and a place away from this one that once knew stability and peaceful coexistence of people from diverse religious and ethnic backgrounds. There was a time in Lebanon, not that long ago, when the law was the driving force that created the conditions for individuals and diverse communities to flourish. In fact, the first law school we know of was located in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Yet my family's story also testifies to the deadly consequences that follow when the law and ethical norms that sustain it collapse. The most painful and powerful lessons my parents taught me was that when the law fails, or when it betrays its purpose and is weaponized to serve ideological ends, rather than justice. When the law fails, people and communities suffer. As I worked my way through my remarks today, I went back to basics and I asked myself, why did I choose to study law? And why did I choose to practice law in the first place? And why do I still choose to practice it, which I do every day, even as managing partner of a large private practice? And what I came to is that growing up in an immigrant household and hearing about my family's experiences with political conflict, social violence, and structural inequities really shaped and sharpened my appreciation of the law as an essential tool for mediating relations between people and groups. I think that's why I came to see the law as a tool for fair and equitable conflict resolution. In fact, I don't think I would have come to law school, let alone finished and started practicing law, if I didn't believe that the law is, at the end of the day, an imperfect but indispensable mechanism to protect the most vulnerable in society from harm and to heal persons and communities when harm is done. It's interesting, when my now 8-year-old daughter has asked me, what do lawyers do? I've taken to telling her simply, lawyers help people. And despite the cynical and sometimes comical depictions we get of lawyers through popular culture, sometimes warranted, the fact remains that the law is one of the most powerful tools at our disposal to right the wrongs that harm people and communities. So I want to shift gears a bit and talk about law school. It's commonplace for many of my fellow lawyers to say that law school doesn't teach you much about the actual practice of law. And I may have heard a comment before I came up here that perhaps had the same sentiment, but I respectfully disagree. There are so many ways that the education you've received at this school has prepared you and prepared you exceptionally well, whether you intend to practice law or not. So let me focus on 3 things law school has taught you that will serve you well wherever your careers take you. First, law school, and Western law especially, is more than a training ground for would-be lawyers. Although your professional preparation certainly has been, whether they've realized it or not, a priority for your professors during your time here. My point simply is that Western law is first and foremost a community of learning, where students learn to think critically and analytically in constant dialogue with professors and peers. And it's true that many of the more technical aspects of legal practice, for those of you who choose that route, will come after you leave law school, beginning, of course, with articling. And it's true that you'll learn a great deal more about the practice of law when you start to practice it. But to practice law well, you need to know how to think, not what to think. Knowledge is important, of course, but mastery of content matters less in the practice of law than the technique of legal reasoning, which is how knowledge ultimately comes to be applied. Law school has taught you to think logically and to think for yourself. It has taught you to question assumptions, starting with your own. It has taught you to interpret evidence and to draw logical conclusions based on that evidence. And hopefully, it has taught you to be humble and self-aware enough to revise your assumptions when the evidence and logical reasoning point in a different direction. In fact, one of the most important things law school has taught you is that the law is not an absolute and unchanging set of edicts chiseled in stone. To the contrary, it is constantly contested and challenged, and therefore changing, hopefully for the better. We need only cast our minds back about 100 years ago to remember a time when the law was used to discriminate against persons in community based on their religion or their race, or a time when the law prohibited racial intermarriage, or when it was used to violate the bodily autonomy and personal dignity of persons with disabilities. Indeed, in many parts of the world, the law still is used to discriminate against persons because of their gender or sexual orientation. Second, law school has prepared you to practice by refining your ability to communicate, especially your ability to convey your ideas in writing. And I'm a living example of this. I came to law school thinking that I was a pretty good writer. Like many of you, I assume, I sailed through my undergraduate studies, but in my second year of law school, I encountered two people who changed my life and became lifelong mentors. Dr. Randy Kostel, who's here today, and Professor Robert Solomon. What Dr. Kostel and Professor Solomon did for me was invaluable. They pushed me hard, and they pushed me toward excellence. They believed in me, and they championed me. I can still remember the flushed feeling coming over my face when Professor Solomon asked to see me on a Sunday morning about my draft paper for his health law seminar, which was worth 100% of my grade. The message, although delicate, was clear. What I had handed in did not meet his expectations. I remember seeing red, literally, where his pen had circled typos or grammatical errors or undeveloped arguments. But instead of handing the paper back to me and leaving it there, Professor Solomon walked me through it, pointing out arguments that were not well formed. He even went back to basic sentence structure. He told me not to hand in my final paper until my pen had touched down on every single word in my essay, so as to ensure precision and accuracy. It's no joke to say that the winter term of 2004 was riddled with nightmares about Professor Solomon's paper. I drafted, redrafted, threw it out, and drafted again. I had never worked that hard, ever. In the end, the fruits of my labor paid off. I finished at the top of Professor Solomon's class, and that paper ended up winning me the JSD Torrey Award in legal writing, which at that time was adjudicated by Dr. Kostel. It was subsequently published in a legal journal. I've never forgotten the lessons that experience taught me. To this day, no written product of mine is finalized before my pen touches down on every single word. And with every pen stroke, I remember this school, and I remember how Randy Kostel and Bob Solomon pushed me to reach beyond my grasp and to demand excellence of myself, and how they saw something in me that I myself did not yet see. I didn't know how much the power to write clearly, concisely, and persuasively would aid me until I started articling. My ability to write distinguished me from the moment I walked into Learners as an articling student in 2006. And as a junior lawyer, it's what propelled my career. It set me apart. In my second year of practice, Earl Cherniak dubbed me the best factum writer in the firm, and I still have that email somewhere. We know that the power to persuade people, a judge, a jury, opposing counsel, or your own clients through verbal communication is hugely important to the effective practice of law. But usually that persuasive oral argument has been developed and reworked first as written text, which is nothing more than the concise and logical presentation of what you believe the law and evidence leads us to conclude about a given issue. I'm eternally grateful for the gift of communication that this school gave me. Third, and finally, law school has taught you that there is a world beyond its walls and beyond the legal profession. I think one of the most powerful lessons I learned in law school in this regard came from an interaction I had before I even started classes in 2002. And while I've written about it here and there, this is the first time I've spoken publicly about it. Not long after receiving my acceptance to study at Western Law, I was confronted with the harsh reality so many students face of not being able to pay my tuition. Even though I had worked almost full-time hours as a bartender and a waitress throughout my undergraduate studies and summers, I simply hadn't been able to save enough, nor was I making enough to be able to afford tuition. Without alternative sources of support, I resolved with a heavy heart to decline the offer I had worked so hard to obtain. I came to the law school to convey the news to the registrar in person and to make a pitch for a year's deferral. You know, I remember what I was wearing that day, what the weather was like, and how every step I took up the stairs to the registrar's office thundered in my mind. How I tried to hold back the tears when I spoke. What happened next might sound like a movie script, but it's a true story. After I explained my situation, the registrar looked at my transcripts and application, looked at me, and said simply, "We will find you a way to study here. You are not going to defer." She made a few calls, and within 30 minutes, I had secured my spot in the class of 2005. That single act of kindness and advocacy from this institution is the reason why I'm standing here before you today as a proud alum of Western Law. It was this community of learning that I joined as a student in 2002 that allowed me to imagine a career in law that I could never have imagined growing up. Western Law gave me my first glimpse into what a life in law could be like. It's why I will always say yes to Western Law, and why I urge you to do the same after you leave here. Today I stand here as the youngest person to hold the role of managing partner at my firm, but I never forget that I am the granddaughter of two women who lived well below the poverty line and never knew what the next day would bring. This institution has the power to transform lives and produce generational change. In conclusion, let me leave you with the wise words of one of my heroes in law, the notorious RBG, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, addressing graduating law students in Paris, France in 2009. Quote, "As you leave here and proceed along life's path, try to leave tracks. Use the education you've received to help repair tears in your communities. I hope you, the graduating class of 2023, will take Justice Ginsburg's sage advice to heart and please leave tracks. And as you take your leave of Western Law, my wish for you is that you'll use the education you've received here as a tool to repair the tears in your community and to move us one step closer to a truly just and inclusive world. Congratulations again. Thank you for having me, and all best wishes."